believe in magic. I believe in the magic of timing, circumstance, memories, listening to my heart, influence, and story. You know, when we do something really well, sometimes it seems like magic. And in order to have the most sustainable and the most positive influence on those you lead, we need to elevate our messages. There's a quote that was attributed to a lot of different people, but the one that I've heard it attributed to most often is Maya Angelou. And she said, "I may not remember what you said. I may not remember what you do, but I will always remember how you made me feel." Now you see, I think that how we make people feel as leaders is paramount in having a positive influence. Because rest assured, you will have influence, whether it's by design or by accident. And when it's by accident, sometimes it's not the most appropriate kind. And so we're going to spend some time together today, and I'm going to try to help you understand how easy it is to elevate your messages. The primary tool to do that is to share your personal experiences, share your story. Now, I'm gonna start by sharing just a wee bit of mine. Before I started my own business, I was the CEO of a startup technical services firm that provided automated teller machine network services to credit unions. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Well, that was my job. And it started out, everybody thought after we negotiated contracts and got some shareholders that the organization would pretty much run itself. That's how little we knew. And yet, that wasn't the way it worked out at all. Because the more shareholders we had and the more contracts we signed with both regional and national networks, the more work there was to do. And so I became more the face of the organization, and I had staff that helped me with the back office things, the reports, the technical services, all those kinds of administrivia kinds of things. And so they weren't hired to be a customer-facing group. However, any of you that have lived in Hawaii or known somebody that lived in Hawaii, you know that people are very friendly, and they often just drop by, sometimes just to say hello, sometimes because they're just in the neighborhood, and sometimes because they had a question or a problem or something that they needed, they felt would help them more if they talked to me in person. When I was there, the staff referred them to me and we took care of it, whatever it was. But I often wasn't there because I was out doing things with either my board of directors or trying to get more shareholders to join into the company. Well, when I wasn't there, the staff pretty much treated these people like they were an interruption to their day. And I began to hear complaints. And whether they emailed me or called me or saw me at some other function, there were always complaints about how they were made to feel like they were an interruption. And so I was a brand new CEO. I didn't know anything about being a CEO. I had started out my professional career as a teacher in remote indigenous villages in Alaska, out in the bush. And then I finished with my education profession, and I lucked into this position, quite candidly. But I was determined to be the best leader I could be. And so I knew that I had to change their behavior. And I tried everything. I tried explaining to them that, these are the people that pay our salaries. These are the people that are why we have a job, all the way to actually docking their pay because I'd had X number of complaints about one person or whatever specifically. None of that worked. And I really didn't know what to do. I was at my wit's end. And whether by design or by luck, we're in a staff meeting, still having those problems. And I said to the staff, sometimes we learn lessons when we're not paying attention. And I said, when my son was 3 years old, we moved to a new village in Alaska to teach the following year. And we decided to go in the summertime to at least get the feel of the village and to meet some of the people and find out where we were going to live and get settled in a little bit. It's much easier to move to a new village, which is usually remote, and you have to fly in a small plane. And it's easier to do that in the summer when the weather's nicer. And so that's what we did. Well, Charlie Bill was 3 years old. He was an only child, and he was used to playing by himself. So I was in my classroom looking through all the different supplies and all that sort of thing, and trying to organize things so I wouldn't have so much to do right before school started. And pretty soon, because I had conveniently put out of my brain that in the summer, the days are pretty much 24 hours long. And so it wasn't too long before he came in and he said, "Mom, what can I do? What can I play?" So I thought for a minute. Now this village was on a river, as many of them were, and across that river was a very large mountain. At that time, it was known as Mount McKinley. Currently, it's known as Mount Denali. Same mountain, always has a little bit of snow on it, even in the summertime. And so I said to him, "Why don't you go out to the shore? Don't go in the river, don't get too close to the water, but just stand there and yell across and see if there might not be another little boy over there that yells back." He thought that was a pretty good idea, and off he went, strutting with the importance of a new job. And he got out there and yelled, "Hello, hello, where do you live? Where do you live?" Well, that was kind of confusing. Why didn't he just answer? "What's your name? What's your name?" And he started getting frustrated. Now, little 3-year-old boys aren't known for their patience. And so pretty soon he was yelling, "I don't like you. I don't like you." And then he yelled, "I hate you. I hate you." And he turned around and he had these great big crocodile tears in his eyes. And I'd been peeking around the corner to see just exactly how he was going to handle his first echoing response. And he came charging to me with these big tears, and he said, Mom, that's a mean kid over there. He doesn't like me at all." Well, many of you who know me know that I never claimed to be Mother of the Year, but I did my best. And I gathered this sweet little boy into my arms, and I tried to comfort him. And after the sobs had subsided a little bit, I said, "You know what? I bet if you went back out there and told that little boy that you'd like to be his friend, you might get a different answer." Well, he didn't think much of Mom's idea. I mean, the first one didn't work out so well, so why would the second one? And I said, "Well, you think about it for a while." So pretty soon I saw him sort of just shuffling out to the edge of the river. And as little boys do, he picked up some rocks and he started throwing them in the river. And pretty soon he said, "Hello, hello. I'm 3 years old. I'm 3 years old. Let's be friends. Let's be friends. And he turned around and he started hooping and hollering. He says, Mom, Mom, he really likes me. He wants to be my friend. And about that time, now this is the magic of childhood, a little boy from the village who had been out fishing with his family came up, and he and Charlie Bill walked off to play together, just like that was the natural consequence to him yelling at that little boy across the river. Now, here's the lesson I learned as I told my staff. I said, you know, if we want people to give us positive reviews and say positive things to us, we need to send out positive messages first. It got really, really quiet in that staff room, and I could almost see the light bulbs coming on in their heads, because all of a sudden they got it. Now, that wasn't even a story about business. It was just a story about communication. It wasn't primarily a story about me. It was about the lesson I learned. But it was more about my 3-year-old. But here's what happens when you tell a story that's universal. Now, nobody else in that room had ever lived in Alaska, much less taught school out in the bush. I get that. But they were all kids once, and several of them had small children at home. And so in their minds, they connected with that, either remembering their own experience with an echo or their children's experience, or maybe both. And suddenly it became real to them. And so all those goofy things that I'd been trying to get them to just be nice didn't work, because I was giving them, bullet points. Do this, don't do that, make sure you smile, all those kinds of things. And what they needed was the story behind the bullet points. And I was fortunate enough to think of it. Now, do stories always work? No, but they work better when they're universal, they're memorable, and they're easy to understand because they're told well. Take some of the lessons that I learned being a CEO and try to apply it to something that was mine. And so I left and I started my own business. And part of my business was to work with leaders at different levels, sometimes from the C-suite and sometimes the newest supervisor in the company. And currently, I work with them virtually as well as in person, in coaching and consulting and maybe talking to small groups, that sort of thing. And as I observed different leaders in different positions, in different organizations, I began to think about how they were influencing their staff, their suppliers, their colleagues, all those kinds of people. And I began to just kind of jot down little reminders of something that happened that could be a good story or a good illustration of what someone did well and how they got people to get it in terms of some concepts that were bigger than do this or do that. And so eventually I created a model, which is what my new book, Return on Influence, is all about. It's based on this model that I call the influence pyramid. And it looks just like a pyramid. So at the base of the pyramid, the first level of influence is what I call compliance. These are people, you know that you're influencing them at this level because you can understand some of their behaviors. Now, when I describe these folks as we go up the pyramid, every person doesn't necessarily embody all these attributes or characteristics, but they embody a majority of them. Can somebody be in more levels than one at the same time? Yes, absolutely. That means they're growing. That means they're changing. But let's start at the bottom with the compliance level. These people they're very punctual. They come to work on time. They take their breaks on time for the absolute right amount of time, and they leave on time. They do things because you tell them to do them. And they're okay with their job, but basically they do the bare minimum to get their job done, and then they go home. Their job is exactly that. It's a job to them. And even in the age we're in now with the global pandemic and people are working from home, you can still tell by their output and their results what level they're at and how much time they've actually spent doing their job at home. Now, as we continue to grow through all of these restrictions and things that continue to change, I think it's going to be a hybrid kind of a work environment. And some people will work at home and some people will work in the office and some people will do both. Maybe they'll be on different days, all those kinds of things. But basically, these are the people that you don't see much you don't see any creative thinking or really any initiative. They do what they're told. They do the bare minimum. They get the job done and then they go home. They are in compliance as a behavioral kind of response. You tell me what to do, I do it. That makes me compliant. And as we go through this, I would like for you to think about where you spend most of your time as a leader. The second level is what I call participation. Now, it's called participation because there's a little bit more initiative. These people are easy to get along with. They're not quite as punctual sometimes as their colleagues in the compliance level, but they're very enthusiastic about certain things. And so when they get a new job or a new project to work on, they sometimes have lots of energy and enthusiasm at the beginning. I call them great starters. But sometimes they don't finish well, or they don't finish at all, and that causes problems in an organization. The reason they behave that way is because they're very much emotional in how they feel. If they feel good that day, or they feel good about that project, then they're gung-ho and away they go. The third level is what I call buy-in. And this level is people that love their job. They do it very well. They like the company. They don't like change. And they're not really confident in their ability to move up usually. Often these are longer term employees, people that have gotten to this particular level where they have certain parameters around what they do, and they do it well, and they like you, and that's it. See, I think that these folks are really the diamonds in the rough in terms of our organizations, because they're doing their job well, and so sometimes we don't take the time to think about why they don't want to move up the corporate ladder or add new things to their area of responsibility. Two reasons: they either don't like change or they're not confident enough on their own to do it. And so these folks should alert us as the leaders that they need more encouragement, they need more support, they need more mentoring in order for them to feel comfortable enough and brave enough to move to the next level. The next level is I call it the leadership level, because at this point, these people are kind of like your proteges perhaps. They're very good at what they do. They sometimes can finish your sentences, and sometimes people from lower parts or different parts of the company will come and ask their opinion or ask for their help rather than yours. And so they're sort of beginning to take steps towards a true leadership role. And they're good at what they do. They believe in the organization, all those things. This is a much more sustainable kind of influence because now they're your people. And if they can finish your sentences, that's great. That's only creepy when Alexa finishes your sentences. You see, I live alone, and so that happens to me sometimes, and it's creepy. I don't know how she does that, but that's a whole different conversation. The final tip of the pyramid is the level I call visionary. These are the folks that may or may not stay with you for the balance of their career. They may get recruited away from you, but these are the people that are looking to make a name for themselves because they do things that are bigger than the organization, bigger than themselves. And so they sometimes start initiatives that aren't even part of their job. Maybe they go out and do some sort of an environmental initiative, or maybe they do some community initiatives, all on their own. Why? Because they have learned that they can influence others, which is really where we need to have our top leaders. They don't need to be down there micromanaging or telling somebody what to do. Now, if you're in a small company and you're the only leader, you're the leader of the band, and the band's only got 2 or 3 people, well then of course you have to take the initiative to help them get familiar with their job and understand how to do it, and some of those things that you would naturally do at the lower levels. But there is what I call a mission critical line between the bottom 3 levels, compliance, participation, and buy-in, and the top 2, leadership and visionary. Because these people up here are they're contributing to the legacy of the company or the organization, but they're also building their own individual legacies, whatever they may be. And so there's this mission critical line that I think is very important, and yet sometimes we don't even recognize it or we don't pay any attention to it. The mission critical line says that the ones below that line are temporary. They're not sustainable. They depend on how somebody feels about themselves or how they feel about the company or what they do in the now rather than in what they're building for the future. None of that is bad, but it's just not where leaders want to spend all their time or need to. Now, if you're lucky enough to have people that work for you in leadership positions, managers, mid-managers, supervisors, all those folks, they're still leaders of their team, of their area of responsibility, and they should be the ones that you are supporting and encouraging to work with these folks rather than you do it. What separates somebody being at a temporary level of influence to somebody that is at a sustainable level of influence? It's exactly what I did with my staff. It's the ability to share your personal experiences. And that works when you're talking to the entire team. I can tell you for sure that my staff weren't all at the compliance level. They weren't all at the buy-in level. They weren't all at the leadership level. They were a mixture. And I didn't mention all of them, but the bigger the organization, the bigger the team, the bigger the mixture and the more diversity. And so in order to connect and to have something that is sustainable, you need to tell them part of your story, part of your experience. Now, there's 3 basic kinds of personal stories that I think apply in pretty much every organization, regardless of size. The first one is the one that I mentioned. It's the personal experience. So whether it happened to you or whether it happened to someone else that you were in the same room or in the same organization, and you had some sort of influence directly or indirectly, like I did with my son, then that's a personal experience. It's not hard to do. The hard part comes in learning to tell those stories well. The second kind of basic stories are parables. Now, I call them parables not because they're religious or anything like that. I know, I'm a preacher's kid, I can do that, but that's not why we're here today. Here's what I know. Parables help us talk about the lessons we've learned in our personal experience, whether in business or as a parent or as a team member or as a traveler, as a visitor, all those different experiences that we have as we continue on our journey. We've learned some lessons. And so I learned the lesson from my son's experience about sending positive messages back out so that I could get positive messages back. And it worked because of the way I told the story. The third kind of basic story is what I call legends or legendary. And these are the stories that evolve over time sometimes, or they happen in your organization or in your team because of some specific event or some specific thing that happened, and they become legendary. They become part of the corporate culture. And when you get somebody new on, they can even become part of the onboarding kinds of activities. Let me tell you about when we did this at this company. And so any of those will resonate with people so that you can have a more positive and more sustainable level of influence. So you just think back and you decide what level are you spending most of your time with, and how can you elevate your messages so that you can help your folks through more positive and sustainable influence. As leaders, we can share our stories for a variety of reasons. And some of you are thinking, I tell stories all the time. And good for you. My question is, A, are they relevant to a specific event or to a specific point that you're trying to make? And B, are you telling it as well as you should? Now, this return on influence, in order to maximize your ROI, is not about how to tell a great story. You want to work on that, you call me and we'll work on it. This is about understanding how to leverage the power of personal experiences in order to have a more positive and sustainable influence on the people you work with. It's pretty simple when you break it down like that. Lots of organizations use stories. They use stories to help them change behaviors. They use stories to try to inspire the troops and motivate them. And they use stories to help somebody understand a specific point or a specific job. And those are all good things. There's nothing wrong with them. But they may or may not, and chances are they are not, up over the mission critical line. They're not as positive. Well, they might be as positive, but they're certainly not as sustainable, usually, as those that are designed specifically to share a personal experience, either in parable form, or this is what happened to me, this is what I learned, or to create or maybe enhance a legend. Now, I've done workshops at a lot of different organizations on this very topic. How do we incorporate storytelling into our daily operations? I will tell you right now, it is not as easy as telling the story, because we forget. And until it becomes totally integrated into our daily operations, we have trouble. At one particular chemical plant in the southeastern part of the United States, I was doing a series of management development kinds of workshops. And so I had leaders at all levels, from the newest supervisor up to the R&D scientist kinds of people and some engineers and all that. And typically, they were mostly men in my workshops. And so I helped them understand why stories are important and why we should share them. And I told them the exact same story about my son as I told you earlier. And you could have heard a pin drop. Why? It probably wasn't the greatest story on the planet, but it resonated with everybody in the room. And it was a hot, stuffy room. There were no windows. It was an interior training room. I don't know why it was like that. They didn't ask me. I would have told them if I'd been designing it, but never mind. And so, as part of the structure of that workshop, I explained to them, after I told the story, we took it apart. And I explained to them why each part was necessary and why stories are important and why they're easy to tell as long as we're truthful to our own stories. It's not about telling somebody else's story and pretending it was yours. So part of the exercise, once we went through all this preliminary stuff, that's a technical term, stuff, anyway, was for them to have an opportunity to practice. And so we went around the room and I said, okay, here's what I want each of you to do. We're going to go around the room and I want you to tell me one concept, one idea that you need to communicate to your team this week. I said, it must be specific. It's not teamwork is good. It's something specific to your team that they need to understand in order to do their jobs better. I don't have to understand what it's all about, but you do. And it's something you need to do this week. So we went around and everybody gave me a sentence or two. And then I said, okay, now you have 10 minutes to come up with a story that illustrates that specific idea. Well, they were used to me because I was kind of goofy and they liked that and they mumbled and grumbled a little bit at the start, and there were always a couple, no matter what kind of exercise or learning experience we were doing, that always said, oh, I can't do that. That stuff doesn't apply to me. And so they were true to form with this one. They said, well, there were two of them, and they were egging each other on, and they said, we don't have any stories. And I said, really? He said, yeah. And I said, why don't you tell me just some of the things that you've done in the last 24 hours? At home, at work, wherever, 24 hours. And so they started talking about going to their kids' soccer games and about something that happened in an early shift at the plant and all those kinds of things. And I just kind of let them talk, and then I said, I think there's quite a few stories in there. And they looked at me and they kind of grinned kind of sheepishly, and they got to work. And when the 10 or 15 minutes was over, I said, okay, now we're going to share our stories. Who wants to be first? Well, there was a young man new to the supervisory ranks. He always sat in the back left-hand corner of the room. And the room was always set up in a U shape. I don't know why, but it was. And so he sat at that corner back there. And he just sort of relaxed in his chair, you know. He never really sat up straight and tall or any of that. He was just kind of chilling. And he never said very much. He was always there. And once in a while I'd see him scribble down a note or something, but really wasn't a real participation kind of guy. And so I said, who wants to be first? And he leaned forward and he said, I do. Well, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I was like, really? And he said, yeah. And I said, okay, tell us your story. He didn't stand up, and I didn't make him. He leaned forward, and this is what he said. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. And I looked around that room, and everybody was like, what's he gonna say next? And he went on with his story, and he said, I was out at the pond in the back of the plant to test the toxicity of the water in the pond. You see, they had to leave all the excess stuff that came out of making these chemicals and went into this pond, and then they treated it until it was okay for them to let it go back into the river, which was right there. And so he said, there I was, hazmat suit and all. He said, I had my testing material and a flashlight. Now his point, just to make sure that you understand, was that management should do something so that people felt safer when they did certain things, like go test the toxicity of the water in the pond at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so he said, I stepped close to the edge of the pond, and just as I was reaching out with my testing material, 2 little eyes popped up, and it was little Timmy, the alligator that lived in the pond. Now all the people in the room looking at each other, because they all knew about little Timmy. They'd been recording that he was in the pond and had been for a while. They couldn't shoot him because he was protected, because he wasn't that big a gator. But as our young man said, I knew he wasn't very big, but I also knew he had very sharp teeth. And it was just me, my flashlight, and little Timmy with very big teeth. And it looked like I was going to be his midnight snack. He said, I knew. Didn't matter how big or little he was, he had sharp teeth. And so he finished his job very quickly, and off he went to record what he'd done. Now, as I said, that had been going on for quite some time at that plant, and pretty much everybody in the room knew all about little Timmy. But he'd never been removed. Probably because there wasn't anybody specifically designated as alligator management removal or whatever. Well, we went on, and he finished his story. All the other people in the room told their stories. They told stories about their grandparents. They told stories about things at work. They told stories about other places that they had worked, all those kinds of things. And I promise you, I could have sold tickets. They were good stories, and they weren't long. The requirement was 3 to 4 minutes. That was it. And they all had a story, and they were all pretty proud of themselves. And then we took a break. And we had kind of critiqued as we went along. I asked them questions and said, you know, some of them didn't have a real clear point. And so I said, help me understand what the point is. And they could. And so we enhanced what they'd done. And they really seemed to enjoy it. And so they even said to me, can we do this again? You know, it's nothing makes you feel better as somebody that's conducting a workshop for great big burly guys that work in a plant, and they want to do this again. So that's why I know it works. Now there's more to the story of little Timmy, which is in my book, and it's all about the backstory to little Timmy and how we actually got to that particular session with those supervisors and other managers, and how they eventually integrated storytelling into their everyday operations. But here's what happened that day when we took that break. Nobody knew that this happened, including me. But about 3 or 4 people got together and made a phone call. And when I got home after my week in that particular plant, in my email, I got 4 different emails, all with the same picture of little Timmy being taken to a better place. They had arranged for that. They didn't ask permission. They felt empowered enough to do it. And here's what happened after that. Part of the story behind the story was that the senior management, the senior leadership of that plant wanted, as a result of some of the workshops that I was doing, for people to take more initiative, to be more empowered and not constantly ask if they could do something or if it was okay. And so they demonstrated that day. They didn't ask anybody, but they solved the problem. Well, it became such a story around the plant that it soon became an internal marketing campaign. Nobody planned that, but they put up posters of little Timmy going away in the pet taxi to a better place. They gave everybody, supervisors, managers, and the senior leadership team, everybody had polo shirts, golf shirts that said Little Timmy's team, and it had the company logo on it. They had hats with Timmy's team printed on it, with an alligator, of course. And it became a legend. And every time after that, they had a new employee. What do you think they told them? You can do certain things without asking permission. Really? How do you know? Well, let me tell you about what happened with little Timmy. We just did it. And they were thrilled. And so I encourage you to think about, what could this do for your company? What could this do for your team? Why would you not want to elevate your message so that you can maximize your return on influence, your ROI? I encourage you to do just that. I challenge you to do just that. And if you want to talk to me about it further, I am happy to talk to you about strategies and other things that you could try that we don't have time today to talk about. Because I know it works. It works across country borders. It works across cultures. It works across industries. I have seen it work in over 50 countries on the planet and on 6 different continents. And it works all the same. Some of those cultural kinds of stories I had no clue about, but they broadened my education and my horizons, and I was happy to learn from them just as they were excited to learn from me. So there's a variety of those kinds of examples in the book, if you're interested, that tell you the rest of the story about little Timmy and what that fostered and how it all came about, and how the plant, which had a history of difficulties in terms of profit and productivity, and how they turned that around. It wasn't just because of that workshop, and it wasn't just because of that story, but it was in part due to how they integrated the practice of using personal experiences when they were communicating and trying to get things done. And in the process, they elevated their message and they got a better ROI. ROI, a return on influence. Thanks for spending some time with me. Thanks for attending this conference. Thanks for everything that you have learned and all the different speakers that have spoken to you in different areas about story and what you can do. Thanks for being here. I had a great time, and I hope you did too. Now, let's see.